Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, and Kukulcan of the Yucatec Maya, the Feathered Serpent, the god of the day, wind, wisdom, and much more, an entity at the center of many Mesoamerican mythologies. By looking into their class, design, skill set, backstory, and characterization, how well do the Quetzalcoatl and Kukulcan of Fate Grand Order compare to their mythical counterparts, and what grade would I give their depictions? Let's find out, shall we? Quetzalcoatl is a rider class servant, while Kukulcan is a foreigner class servant, the first foreigner I have covered. Let's start with Quetz. For her third MP, Quetzalcoatl, she can summon a Quetzalcoatlus as a mount, a type of flying dinosaur found in the 1970s named after the god. This is her primary qualification for the rider class. But the dinosaur was named after Quetzalcoatl. It doesn't actually have anything to do with Quetz or her legends. I guess it's not completely terrible, but it's not good either. If I had to give a class to Quetzalcoatl, I'd go with Ruler, for much the same reason as I did for Tezcatlipoca. Maybe it's just me, but Ruler seems like the best choice for divinities of their caliber, creator gods who look upon the concerns of mortals like we look at the games we play. As for Kukulcan, it's time for me to explain the foreigner class. Foreigner is kind of a weird name at first, since the word makes you think of people from different countries. Though with the rate that Japanese servants keep getting added to the game, there might come a day when the devs just give the foreigner class to everyone else. More seriously, foreigner in this context means someone who has made a connection with an entity that exists outside of human understanding. Something from space, the Cthulhu mythos, or something like that. It's the class that we probably know the least about. As for the characters who end up with it, they typically either are connected with outer space, are remembered as being a bit crazy, or there's uncertainty about their ultimate fate. Abigail Williams is infamous for her role in the Salem witch trials, but nobody knows what happened to her after that. Katsushika Hokusai and Van Gogh are our resident mad painters. Their reputations speak for themselves. Others, like Voyager, or indeed Kukulcan herself, have a connection to outer space. The overall theme is, because of their reputations for madness or the mysteries surrounding them, that foreigner class servants have made connections with entities outside of human knowledge. Since Kukulcan is revealed to be the heart of Ort, a giant space monster that came from beyond the solar system, her getting the foreigner class makes sense in the context of FGO's story. Though, like with Quetzalcoatl, if this was proper history Kuku, I'd go with Ruler. But since our Kukulcan is explicitly from the Lost Belt, and the connections she does have to proper history are only because Kukulcan is imitating her proper history counterparts, she is effectively an original character that just so happens to be named after the Yucatec Mayan deity. Getting into their character designs, we first have to talk about gender, since Quetzalcoatl is typically portrayed as male, even if Aztec deities of her caliber tend to be less fussy about gender. In her profile, it says that the reason she has appeared as a woman is because of her connections to the planet Venus, due to the influence of other gods associated with Venus, specifically Aphrodite. What? Quetz got flipped because of a connection to another god who isn't even from the same hemisphere, much less the same mythology? They don't even have the same domains, since Aphrodite, Venus, and even Ishtar are all goddesses of love, whereas Quetzalcoatl's domains are wind, wisdom, light, a billion other things. It's Xochiquetzal, not Quetzalcoatl, that is the Aztec goddess of love. But speaking of Xochiquetzal, do you remember that Legend of the Five Suns thing I talked about in my Tezcatlipoca video? The cycle of creation and destruction in Aztec mythology? Well, Xochiquetzal was the consort of the third sun's primary god, Tlaloc. But then Tezcatlipoca stole her away, and, in his grief, Tlaloc first stopped performing his role as both the sun and the rain god, and then he made it rain fire, destroying the third world. I'll probably mention this again in my upcoming Tlaloc video, but I thought I'd mention it here since I just mentioned Xochiquetzal. Anyway, my point is, flipping Quetzalcoatl because of a connection to the planet Venus, and so to the gods from a different hemisphere, that's a really big stretch. They'd have been better off saying Quetz was flipped just because, rather than coming up with this nonsensical connection to Aphrodite. As for Kukulcan, she's just imitating Quetzalcoatl, and so took on a similar form, which, hilariously, is a better justification for her gender flip than the one Quetz has. Moving to her Ascension forms, Quetzalcoatl, despite her FGO version becoming a Lucha Libre fanatic who uses gratuitous amounts of Spanish in her dialogue, actually has a very traditional appearance, wearing an outfit that just screams Mesoamerica. It's as if she is dressed like an Aztec emperor, which is probably intentional, since one of the many versions of Quetzalcoatl is a mythical Toltec king named Quetzalcoatl, a hero king in central Mexico that is sometimes conflated with Quetzalcoatl. I'm guessing that this is what the designers were going for, to make Quetz look like the ruler of a Mesoamerican empire. If that was the goal, then they certainly succeeded. But if the goal was to make her look like the god Quetzalcoatl, then it misses the mark. In traditional depictions, Quetzalcoatl is portrayed as an old man. Obviously that's not what we get here, but more than that, Quetz isn't really associated with any particular weapon, much less the macahuitl. Speaking of which, while it is undoubtedly really cool, the macahuitl was not, in fact, a chainsaw sword. I mean, the weapon could be used like a saw, but chainsaw is a bit much. Kukulcan goes for a very different vibe in her various Ascension forms. Her first form are the clothes she bought for herself as part of her effort to blend in with mortal society. And you know what? That actually makes sense in a weird way. These clothes don't really fit Mesoamerica. They seem more like something out of Hollywood's version of the American Southwest. The only real hint as to her true identity is the serpent upon the arm of the jacket. At the very least, Kuku wearing an outfit that seems right but is a bit off is very consistent with her characterization. As for her other two ascensions, the second is a space-themed thing that somehow doesn't fall off, while the third ascension takes that, adds more traditionally Mesoamerican elements, and so gives us a Mesoamerican space goddess? That's the best summary I can give it, at least. I do give Kukulcan more leeway since she is a Lost Belt character, who is just trying to adapt elements from her proper history counterparts, but she still fails, albeit in a rather endearing way. Overall, I'd say the designs for both Quetzalcoatl and Kukulcan are mixed. Quetz looks very Mesoamerican, but more like a ruler rather than a deity, whereas Kukulcan is trying to look the part of a Mesoamerican deity, but since she doesn't really know how, she misses the mark. Moving into their skill sets, we're going to start with the rider Quetzalcoatl. Her first skill is Charisma, which becomes Charisma of the Sun after an upgrade. Charisma is a generic skill we have seen many times, the ability of a leader to inspire their followers and allies, giving them a boost in battle. Quetz getting Charisma is fine, whether you are talking about the deity or the mythical king of the Toltecs, Quetzalcoatl. It's generic, but it works. But when we get to the upgrade, Charisma of the Sun, things start to get more iffy. On the one hand, Quetzalcoatl did act as the second sun in the Aztec creation myth, though after Tezcatlipoca turned all the humans into monkeys, Quetz blew them away with the wind. But on the other hand, that's the only real connection Quetzalcoatl has with the sun, a moment in the past when she was the god of the sun. The closest thing to a sun god the Aztecs had would be the god powering the fifth sun, Huitzilopochtli. If it were up to me, I'd emphasize Quetz's connection with the wind rather than the sun, because that is something consistent not only with Quetzalcoatl, but with her many variations throughout Mesoamerica. Quetz's second skill is Wisdom of the Benevolent God, a unique skill for Quetzalcoatl that centers around her role as a god of wisdom. Quetz has quite a resume in this regard. She is credited with bringing maize to humanity, a vital crop for the people of Mesoamerica, just like it is today. Quetz is also the patron god of priests and the nobility. Indeed, the two top priests in the Aztec Empire, the ones at the Templo Mayor, both had Quetzalcoatl as part of their titles. Quetzalcoatl Totec Tamacatzqui and Quetzalcoatl Tlaloc Tlamacazqui. Basically anything that has to do with learning, knowledge, astronomy, craftsmanship, it lies within the domain of Quetzalcoatl. As for Quetz being a benevolent or good god, she was notable for being helpful towards humans on several occasions. Quetzalcoatl's third skill is Lucha Libre, the art of wrestling in Mexico dating back originally to the 19th century, but which became prominent in the 20th. Now, Mexico had become an independent country by then, so obviously this is something that came way after the Aztec Empire, nor does it have anything to do with Quetzalcoatl. FGO admits as much in her profile, saying that Quetz was summoned into the modern era once, became such a massive lucha fan that it affected her spirit origin, and so we get this skill. Still, despite the disclaimer in her profile, Lucha is such a big part of Quetz's FGO characterization that it's impossible to ignore, affecting everything from her dialogue, animations, MP, the list goes on. But as fun as it is, Lucha has nothing to do with Quetzalcoatl, making this skill, and everything else having to do with Lucha and Quetz's character, a fail from an accuracy perspective. Switching over to Kukulcan's skill set, her first skill is Charisma of Jade, another variation of the Charisma skill. Her profile states that this version of Charisma taps into the power of proper history Kukulcan, specifically how Kukulcan is a god of both wind and water. Wind is something that is consistent across the many different versions of the Feathered Serpent in Mesoamerica. But whereas the Mayan Kukulcan has dominion over water, specifically rain and storms, the Aztec Quetzalcoatl does not. That role goes to Chalchihutliqui, the goddess of water, the fourth of the 5 sons in the Aztec creation myth, and Tlaloc's second consort after Tezcatlipoca stole Xochicalco away during the 3rd son. Now Tez didn't steal Chalchihutliqui away, but he did make her cry, enough so that her tears caused a gigantic flood, destroying the 4th world. Tez really is a troublemaker, isn't he? Anyway, that was a bit of a derail. This skill, Charisma of Jade, while the name is a little misleading, it has nothing to do with Jade, it is consistent with Kukulcan's proper history counterpart. Kuku's second skill is We Are the Winged Serpent, referring to the form often taken not only by Kukulcan, but other versions of the deity in proper history. Well, it's usually worded a bit differently. To translate the names of these various deities into English, the Aztec Quetzalcoatl means Feathered Serpent, the Yucatec Mayan Kukulcan means Plumed Serpent, and the Quiche Mayan Cucumatz means Quetzal Serpent. It says in the profile that Cucumatz translates to Winged Serpent, but I can't find that particular version. Now, do Kukulcan, Quetzalcoatl, and Kukulmatz have wings? Sometimes, the depictions vary. We know that they can fly at least. I'm probably just being pedantic. This is still a solid link to the legends even if I find the name to be a bit weird. Lastly, Kuku's third skill is Golden Sea of Trees, the other name for her homeland, Lost Belt 7, Nahui Mictlan. This is a skill specific to the Kukulcan of the 7th Lost Belt, wielding the memory of that world, its inhabitants, and her role within it to give herself a massive power boost. Obviously, this has nothing to do with proper history Kukulcan, but I'm more forgiving about this because while this skill only works for Lost Belt Kukulcan, her first and second skills could work for proper history Kuku. Lost Belt Morgan was much the same way. Her third skill was Lost Belt specific while her first and second skills worked for both proper history and Lost Belt Morgan, barring the name change to her second skill, obviously.
あなたには高さが足りません。私は蛇。私は炎。シュークワトルチャレアード。アディオスルード。
Quetzalcoatl's noble phantasm is Shu-Coatl, whereupon she throws her enemy up into the air, summons a flaming bird-like thing, then grabs the enemy and slams them into the ground. Shu-Coatl, the turquoise serpent, is a fire serpent that, in addition to being one of the forms of the fire god Shu-Tecutli, is also wielded as a weapon by another one of the gods. The problem is, the god who wields Shu-Coatl as a weapon isn't Quetzalcoatl, it's Huitzilopochtli. Now, her profile talks about how this MP is supposed to represent that story I told back in Tez's video, where Tezcatlipoca got Quetzalcoatl drunk, Quetz did some crazy things including incest, and so, humiliated, Quetz set herself on fire and left the world, becoming the morning star, Venus. So for this MP, Quetz is wielding the flames of her own bonfire. I mean, maybe that could work? But why the hell would you name this MP Shu-Coatl, after the weapon wielded by a completely different Aztec deity? That is a fail. The only positive thing I have to say is that you see her create a tornado during the MP animation, a nod towards Quetz's power over the wind, which, again, is much more important than any connection Quetz has to the sun or fire. Quetzalcoatl has two other MPs. The second MP is Piedra del Sol, wielding the power of the Aztec Sunstone to create a gigantic explosion. The Aztec Sunstone, Piedra del Sol in Spanish, is a gigantic sculpture dating back to sometime between 1502 to 1520 CE. The name Moctezuma II appears upon it, so it had to have been made sometime during his reign. especially since the Aztec Empire died only a year after that. Since this stone has depictions of the 4 previous suns, as well as the days of the Aztec calendar, it is sometimes called the calendar stone. It's not actually a calendar though. People have been trying to figure this thing out since its rediscovery in 1790. Is it a symbol of rulership? A representation of how the Aztecs saw time? We aren't even sure about the exact identity of the big face in the middle. Oh, and this thing weighs 25 tons. It's huge. Anyway, since this stone shows all this cosmic creation stuff, I guess the devs figured that this MP would let Quetz create a small sun, then blow it up, basically setting off a nuke. While there is obviously some creative license at work here, the idea of Quetz having a massively destructive MP is acceptable. I just wish it was more wind-based rather than fire-based. Like with Quetzalcoatl, it is Huitzilopochtli who wields the power of fire. It really does feel like the devs mixed up Quetzalcoatl with Huitzilopochtli. Quetz's third MP is Quetzalcoatl, referring to the Quetzalcoatlus, the flying dinosaur named after Quetz that she uses as a mount. Discovered first in 1971, the Quetzalcoatlus is the largest flying animal ever known to exist on Earth. It is believed to have lived during the late Cretaceous period, or between 72 and 66 million years ago. We see Quetz hop onto this thing for her extra attack animation, and we also see it during the Babylonia anime. Now, despite me taking issue with using this to justify Quetz being a rider, I don't have a problem with her using it as a mount. It is named after her after all. To me, summoning a Quetzalcoatlus is a cool bonus, something I don't mind seeing Quetzalcoatl have, but it shouldn't be what determines her class. Anyway, that's all 3 of Quetz's MPs. Hooray! Now, what about Kukulcan?
我呼吸より来たい地を作る天より見下ろすこれすなわち太陽なりキリチアハウインパクト
Kukulcan's noble phantasm is Kinichahao Impact, whereupon she grows herself into a giant, places her foes upon a platform, and then shatters it with a massive strike. The main connection this MP has to Mayan mythology is its name, since Kinichahao is the name of the Yucatec Maya's sun god. In her profile, they also give the alternate MP name of El Castillo Kukulcan, referring to the famous temple at Chichen Itza dedicated to Kukulcan. I did see one source suggesting that Kinichahao and Kukulcan are sometimes conflated, that they are the same being, but I'm having trouble corroborating that. If that is the case though, and considering that Kinichahao was specifically meant to be a sun god, then it makes sense that Lost Belt Kukulcan's MP would be named after him, since Lost Belt Kukulcan basically is a sun god, even if proper history Kukulcan was not. Something else found in Kuku's profile is that her growing into a giant in this MP is identical in nature to the exposed lumina form of a certain true ancestor, meaning Arcoid, something you see in the Ciel route of the Tsukihime remake. They make this connection between Arcoid and Kukulcan, since they are both archetypes trying to defend the planet, though Kukulcan lacks some of the abilities Arcoid has since Kuku isn't originally from Earth. On a related note, can they please release an English translation of Tsukihime Remake on PC already? I wants it, and not being able to have it makes me sad. Anyway, moving on.
雷雲サル螺旋の空究極の位置我こそ最後の大義ラストサンシバルバー
Kukulcan's second noble phantasm is Last Sun Xibalba, where she summons a cosmic storm, then directs it towards her enemies, creating a massive explosion. This is an alternate version of Kinichahao Impact, for when Kukulcan is acting as the Heart of Ort in her third and final ascension forms. Since the Heart of Ort was used by Camazotz to empower the sun of Mictlan, that rejuvenated the sun, giving us the Kukulcan we know, the guardian deity of Mictlan. And since she proved to be the final son of Mictlan, it makes sense that this MP would be called Last Sun, and then to use the Mayan name for the underworld, Xibalba. It's close to the name of Tezcatlipoca's MP, First Son Xibalba. Though, fun fact, remember when I said earlier that in Aztec mythology Quetzalcoatl was the second of the 5 sons? Well, if you consider the son of Lost Belt Mictlan prior to the Khan Kingdom to be its first son, and then the son rejuvenated by Ort's Heart, its second son, that would mean that Quetzalcoatl of proper history and Lost Belt Kukulcan were both gods of the second son. They might be from different worlds and different mythologies, but I thought that was a neat parallel. Oh, and just because the devs wanted to make my life as difficult as possible for this video, they included a third MP for Kukulcan in her profile, one for her proper history version, the sixth MP I'm covering in this video. It is called Kukulcan Kukulcan, and involves Kukulcan summoning a massive gale force wind to devastate everything in its path. Huracan, the heart of the sky, is the god that controls the forces behind great storms, wind, fire, and the storm itself. Indeed, his name is where we get the English word hurricane from. He, together with Cucumatz and Tepeo, are the three creator gods in the Quiche Mayan creation myth, the Popol Vuh. So, if we had proper history Kukulcan, this would be their MP, to summon the power of their fellow creator deity to help unleash a hurricane. Since Quetzalcoatl, Kukulcan, and Cuculmatz are all gods of wind, and Kukulcan also has dominion over storms, it's something that Kukulcan could easily do themselves. She just gets a bit of help from another storm god to make it even more powerful. This would have been a great MP not only for proper history Kukulcan, but something like it would have been great for Quetzalcoatl too. Quetzalcoatl's craft essence is Piedra del Sol, depicting the Aztec sunstone atop a temple, giving us another idea of just how big this stone is. I've already talked about the stone itself, and the MP named after it. As for the CE's text, it talks about the cycle of creation, destruction, and rebirth in Aztec mythology, the legend of the five suns. I've already talked about this both in my Tezcatlipoca video and throughout this one, that the Aztecs believe that our current world is the fifth world, or the fifth sun, and that previous worlds had different gods acting as the sun, but then something happened that led to that world's destruction. Kukulcan's craft essence is My First Gift, depicting the jacket that Kukulcan wears in her first ascension. The CE's text tells the story of how Kuku acquired this jacket, how she was initially hesitant to desire anything for herself, but was then persuaded to get it by the shop's owner. It's actually a rather heartwarming story. This is, of course, something important to Lost Belt Kukulcan, rather than her proper history counterpart. Quetzalcoatl's Valentine C is Chocolate Libertad, roughly translating to Freedom Chocolate, depicting a mug of hot chocolate. Yum. But why this gift? Well, there's a legend dating back to the Toltecs, saying that Quetzalcoatl, in addition to bringing maize and other vital crops to humanity, also later brought the cacao plant, then taught them how to make it into a drink. In other words, Quetzalcoatl gave humanity chocolate. That Quetzalcoatl is, in effect, the god of chocolate. You know what? I think I just found religion. I hereby dedicate myself to the one true God, the one who gave us the gift of chocolate, Quetzalcoatl. Consider this my first offering. But one other thing, Quetz actually stole this cacao plant from one of the other gods, leading to the incident where Tezcatlipoca got Quetz drunk with pulque. But while this may have ended with Quetz leaving this world, the gift of chocolate remains with us. Hooray! Kukulcan's Valentine C is Orbit Radiant Thing, depicting a sphere of compressed chocolate, and a few little dino chocolates beside it. This is a rather comedic gift, along with the scene that goes with it. Lost Belt Kukulcan doesn't know anything about chocolate, and so tries to get help from her fellow archetype, but ends up with a version of Aquaweed who is similarly clueless. The end result is a sphere of chocolate that is so dense that you can't even eat it. This is mainly a comedy gift, though, like with Quetzalcoatl, proper history Kukulcan also provided the Yucatec Mayans with cacao, technically making her another god of chocolate. Well, looks like I found another god I find worthy of following. One moment, please. I need to make another offering. Admittedly, I was planning to grail Kuku anyway, but here's another good reason to do it. There is also, of course, the name, a reference to Kuku's origins as the heart of Ort. I'd say this is a good gift overall, for comedy, character relevance, and even with a little link to Kukulcan's mythology. Now for characterization, starting with a look into the legends surrounding Quetzalcoatl and Kukulcan. Well, I've already written a full video's worth of text, digging into all the different aspects of Quetzalcoatl and Kukulcan's design and skill set. Surely there can't be too much more to talk about, right? Right? Actually, why did I make these two part of the same video? Especially if the end result would be a monster-length video like this. Well, the short answer is that Quetzalcoatl and Kukulcan are both versions of the Feathered Serpent, a type of deity with a long and prominent history throughout Mesoamerica. How old is it? The first Feathered Serpent deity we know of goes back to the Olmecs, the oldest known Mesoamerican civilization dating from roughly 1400 to 400 BCE. There isn't much we know about the Olmecs. The name itself isn't even what they called themselves, it's a name the Aztecs gave them. The Olmecs would eventually decline for unknown reasons, but they would influence their many successors, passing on the concept of a feathered serpent god down to them. After the Olmecs came Teotihuacan, a city in central Mexico which was prominent from 200 BCE to around 700 CE, when it too collapsed. Nevertheless, the ruins of Teotihuacan remain with us, and include among the most extensive collection of temples in all of Mesoamerica. One of the most prominent is known as the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, a massive pyramid covered in sculptures depicting the serpent. This temple doesn't just feature sculptures of the Feathered Serpent, but also Tlaloc, later the Aztec god of rain. After the fall of Teotihuacan, the Feathered Serpent would spread elsewhere, notably to the city of Cholula, whose Great Pyramid dedicated to the Feathered Serpent is, though shorter than the pyramids in Egypt, is much wider in area, making it, by volume, the largest pyramid in the world. Cholula would become the Central American hub for all things Feathered Serpent, acquiring the name Quetzalcoatl. But central Mexico was not the only place where worship of the Feathered Serpent was significant. After the collapse of the Olmecs, it also spread south into the Yucatan, becoming a major part of the Mayan civilization's mythology as well. Its most significant home would, of course, be Chichen Itza, and its most famous temple, El Castillo, is dedicated to the Yucatec Mayan version of the Feathered Serpent, Kukulcan. I should note that, despite both having a common origin as Feathered Serpent gods, Quetzalcoatl and Kukulcan are distinct deities. It's kinda like the difference between Greek and Roman gods. They're very similar, but not exactly alike, the main differences being in how they fit into their respective mythologies. Anyway, the Mayans spread the worship of Kukulcan throughout their empire, which would endure even after that empire fractured apart after around 950 CE. But offshoots of Mayan civilization would continue on, notably the Quiche Maya of Guatemala, who would call their version of the Feathered Serpent Cucumats. Oh, and if you think that's every version of the Feathered Serpent in Mesoamerica, think again, because there was also a legendary king of the Toltecs who was sometimes conflated with Quetzalcoatl. This legendary figure was called Che-Acatl-Topiltzin, said to have been the ruler of the Toltec Empire during the early 10th century. He was notable for being a good ruler who shunned human sacrifice and brought much prosperity to the Toltecs, an example future rulers in central Mexico would try to emulate. He is commonly believed to have then abdicated his throne, left on a canoe, and set himself ablaze, much like how Quetzalcoatl is later said to have done after his drunken rampage. The Toltecs would collapse sometime in the 12th century, but another future empire in central Mexico would emulate the Toltecs and claim to be their successors, the Aztecs. However, while the Feathered Serpent would also be important to the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl ends up getting sidelined in favor of other deities, notably Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli. To the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl is an older deity that played a major role in creating the world, only to leave that world as the other gods took center stage. Whew, okay. I think that gives you a rough idea of the history of Feathered Serpent deities throughout Mesoamerica, even if that still is only just scratching the surface. If you haven't picked up on it already, let me sum it up for you. The Feathered Serpent was a legendary figure dating back thousands of years that has appeared again and again throughout Mesoamerica. Whether it be the Feathered Serpent of the Olmecs and Teotihuacan, Kukulcan of the Yucatec Mayans, Cucumats of the Quiche Maya, the mythical king Che-Acatl-Topiltzin, or the central Mexican Quetzalcoatl. In other words, if there is one mythological entity that is ubiquitous throughout Mesoamerica, it is the Feathered Serpent. So, with all of that in mind, I'm going to try my best to talk about some general concepts concerning this deity, particularly those found in the two incarnations of it that are most relevant to us, Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs and Kukulcan of the Yucatec Mayans. First, let's look at the concept of the Feathered Serpent itself. On the one hand, a snake, and so something found on Earth that humans are quite familiar with, and on the other, something that can fly, in the realm of the gods. In other words, the Feathered Serpent was like a bridge between the realms of humans and the divine. This dual nature is something that we find repeatedly throughout Mesoamerican mythology, that deities can be many things, including concepts that seem diametrically opposed. This is something that the Spanish had trouble understanding when they first arrived in the Americas, which led to something that affects the characterization of Quetzalcoatl and fate. Since the Aztec Quetzalcoatl is often portrayed as being against human sacrifice, the Spanish thought of Quetzalcoatl as a good god, and so naturally Tezcatlipoca, being the rival and opposite of Quetzalcoatl, was considered an evil god. If you've already seen my video on Tezcatlipoca, then you know this is a major oversimplification. Sure, Tezcatlipoca is a massive troublemaker who is responsible for all kinds of mischief, but he isn't fundamentally evil. Nor is Quetzalcoatl wholly good. He is a demiurge, a creator god who helped create the world, and, as seen in the stories of the first and second sons of Aztec mythology, is also capable of causing mischief and destruction as well. But what about this bit about Quetzalcoatl being against human sacrifice? This is a common part of Quetzalcoatl's portrayal, and there is some debate over whether or not it was actually true. Sometimes Quetz is against human sacrifice, while other times he is for it. I should emphasize that I'm talking about Quetzalcoatl specifically. Other versions of the Feathered Serpent, including Kukulcan, did have human sacrifices done in their name. But if Quetzalcoatl didn't like human sacrifice, then what offerings did Quetz get? To explain that, it's time to dig into the legend of the Five Sons again, to talk about the fifth son, the world that we reside in. After 4 failures to create the world, the gods were understandably a bit uncertain about what to do next, including there being a conflict over who exactly would become the fifth son. At least, that's one version of the fifth son legend. There's another version that centers around Quetzalcoatl, but we will get into that in another video. Regardless of the version, Quetzalcoatl heads down into Mictlan, gathers bones from the previous generation of humanity, and then Quetz uses his own blood to bring life into this next generation of humans. Because Quetz gave his own blood to make the current world's humans, one of the main offerings given to Quetzalcoatl in the Aztec Empire was via bloodletting, to offer one's own blood as thanks to Quetzalcoatl. So, to wrap this backstory section up, the Feathered Serpent deities in Mesoamerica, be it Quetzalcoatl, Kukulcan, Kukulmats, and all the rest, they were one of the core parts of their various mythologies. As a creator god, Quetzalcoatl helped to create the world, the humans of the fifth son, and gave humans things like books, the calendar, maize, cacao, and more. While the exact domains of the Feathered Serpents vary depending upon the version, they are almost always gods of the sky, the wind, life, light, and wisdom. Quetzalcoatl in particular was the patron god of the priests and nobility, and by extension held sway over things that the ruling classes would hold in esteem: knowledge, learning, and the arts. And considering how widespread the Feathered Serpent was throughout Mesoamerica, it's the closest thing they had to a universal deity, albeit one with many local variations. What I have said here really only scratches the surface, but you get the idea. The Feathered Serpents, be it Quetzalcoatl, Kukulcan, Kukulmats, or their other versions, are among the most important of all mythological figures to come out of ancient Mesoamerica. Swapping over to Fate Grand Order, we first meet Quetzalcoatl in the 7th singularity, Babylonia, where she is part of the 3-goddess alliance tearing Mesopotamia apart. At least, that's how it looks at first glance. In reality, Quetzalcoatl is basically a double agent, being on the side of humanity who plans to counter Gorgon's quest for vengeance. This is a good thing too, because Quetzalcoatl is by far the most powerful member of the 3-goddess alliance. Gorgon is a major threat, but you have the younger Medusa as a hard counter, while Ereshkigal, though supreme in the underworld, similarly lacks Gorgon's malice. Had Quetzalcoatl been truly against Chaldean humanity, they wouldn't really have been able to stop her. In fact, as a fellow creator god, Quetzalcoatl is in the same league as the true threat in Babylonia, the beast Tiamat. Or at least, she would have been had Merlin not been Merlin, tricking Quetz into violating her pact with the other goddesses, costing her over half of her power, right before Tiamat herself was revealed as the real danger. Quetz still made a good showing against Tiamat, but even her mightiest noble phantasm only managed to slow Tiamat down. Now, if Quetz had been at full power, would she have been a match for Tiamat? it would certainly be a more even fight, but my bet would still be on Tiamat, at least as long as the battle was taking place in Mesopotamia. Feel free to debate this one if you like, but even entertaining this idea does highlight a point, and that is that Quetzalcoatl in Fate is portrayed as being a very powerful servant, as is her Lost Belt counterpart, Kukulcan. This is great to see since, while Quetz isn't explicitly a war god like Huitzilopochtli or even Tezcatlipoca, she is still a creator god, one who creates and destroys entire worlds. Quetz and Kuku both ought to be among the most powerful entities you can possibly summon, so FGO gets this right. But, as for the rest of Quetzalcoatl's characterization, the links to the sun instead of the wind, her obsession with Lucha Libre, the frequent use of Spanish in her dialogue, all of that is not good. The only other thing they really get right aside from Quetz's power is being helpful towards humanity. But even then, we are still dealing with a creator god, a distant, supremely powerful entity who, because of that perspective, she just might let huge numbers of people die before actually doing anything. Which neatly brings us to Lost Belt 7 and our alternate Quetz, Kukulcan. Unlike pretty much every other Lost Belt king, who are all figures from proper history who ended up making different choices, and so have become different characters, Lost Belt Kukulcan is basically a new character entirely. She is an incarnation of the teachings of the sun espoused by the Denos, but she only actually became self-aware with the arrival of David and Tezcatlipoca to Mictlan. With them having brought the concept of gods to the 7th Lost Belt, Kukulcan was incarnated into a new being. With the world being flooded with all these influences from Mesoamerican proper history, Kukulcan took inspiration from her counterpart Quetzalcoatl, seeking to become a good-natured guardian deity who does her best to protect the world of Mictlan. But that's just it right there. Kuku guards the world of Mictlan, and not necessarily its inhabitants. She doesn't have the malice that Morgan's rule over Lost Belt Britain has. It's more like she takes on a larger perspective. The trouble is, Kuku is caught in a bit of a bind, because the thing that is required for the Lost Belt to survive is the same entity that Tezcatlipoca and David are looking to use to destroy that very Lost Belt, and the world as a whole. She wants to help humanity in Chaldea, but her role as the guardian of Mictlan, technically it makes Chaldea her enemy, since they plan to destroy Ort, and with it the 7th Lost Belt. There's also the fact that, she is actually the heart of Ort, which means in order to truly defeat Ort, Kukulcan has to kill herself too. This ends up leading Kukulcan into being conflicted for much of the second half of the story. She pops in to help when her whims push her to do so, but otherwise acts as an all-powerful bystander, watching as her world and its inhabitants are wiped out by something that, because Ort has become the anchor for the Lost Belt, she can't fight against it without going against her role as Mictlan's guardian deity. It is only after Mictlan has basically gone extinct that Kukulcan finally chooses a side, encouraged by Tepeo to stop playing a role and just be who she wants to be, leading her to come to Chaldea's aid in their final battle against Ort. This story arc, of a guardian figure who is torn between her duties and desires, it works just fine, but it admittedly seems less interesting when compared to other major characters in Lost Belt 7, be it Tezcatlipoca's whimsical games, the tragedy of Camazotz, Tenochtitlan getting a second chance to fight, and many more. Still, with her fun personality, the goofy awkwardness of her trying to adapt human ways, and the final reveal that she is, in fact, the heart of an ultimate one, Kukulcan still made a notable showing in the 7th Lost Belt, a guardian deity of great power that, though it took a while to get around to it, ultimately did help save the world. There are, of course, other appearances that Quetzalcoatl and Kukulcan have or will make. I didn't even bother talking about Quetz's interlude, Summer 2, or Christmas 4. But, to be perfectly honest, I don't need to, because they only act as further examples of just how different Fate's Quetzalcoatl is to the original. Her interlude is literally a lucha tournament. Quetz has the power, the status, and is helpful towards humanity. But that's kinda it. In a rather screwed up twist, the Lost Belt character, Kukulcan, who isn't even meant to be Kukulcan but is only pretending to be, she acts more like a creator deity than Quetzalcoatl does. This means that, with Quetzalcoatl, we get a caricature full of anachronisms and errors, a poor representation of the deity. But while Kukulcan is a bit better in this regard, it feels moot because she's not even meant to be Kukulcan at all. but a new original character created from the heart of a galactic space monster. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Quetzalcoatl and Kukulcan's depictions in Fate Grand Order? Well, to start with Quetz, her class choice isn't great. The reason given for her gender bend is a self-owned by the developers. Her design is better, but fits an Aztec emperor better than it does a god. The skill set makes Quetz seem more like a sun or fire god rather than a wind god, and characterization is largely just a goofball Lucha Libre fanatic who only sometimes acts like the incredibly powerful creator goddess she is meant to be. Kukulcan, despite explicitly not even being a Lost Belt version of either Quetzalcoatl or proper history Kukulcan, still manages to get a few things right in her skill set and characterization, but is otherwise a Type Moon original character. In short, neither Quetzalcoatl nor Kukulcan are well portrayed in Fate. This might seem weird since they actually did pretty good with Tezcatlipoca, and even Camazotz despite him also being more of an original character with only a few links to his mythology. The unavoidable conclusion is that it feels like the developers threw Quetzalcoatl into Babylonia as an afterthought. They were clearly more comfortable with Mesopotamia than Mesoamerica. But once they realized that they had to write a story set in the Americas for Lost Belt 7, the writers decided to put some real effort into learning about the mythology, and so giving us a solid portrayal of Tezcatlipoca. Alas, for Quetzalcoatl, they screwed up badly, and it's probably too late to just remake the entire character. Kukulcan is a bit better, but considering they weren't even trying to make her like proper history Kukulcan, it isn't much of an improvement. Okay, so since we have two characters, there will be two different grades. To start, I am going to give Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec god of the day, wind, and wisdom, an F. For Kukulcan, the Yucatec Mayan god of wind, rain, and life, a D+. In her servant form, Quetzalcoatl has become conflated with her brother god Quetzalcoatl, wielding the powers of the sun and fire. But here, on this channel, I am the one who wields fire! If you would like to learn more about Quetzalcoatl's great rival, check out my video on Tezcatlipoca right here. Also please like, subscribe, and come check out the weekend streams sometime. We finally finished Red Dead Redemption 2, and are now moving into Fallout London. Until next time.